What is this? Rise, mountains.
Welcome to the Normal and Heroic Tectus Raid Guide. Alright, the first major ability you'll have to worry about is Crystalline Barrage. Tectus will put a debuff on a random ranged member, and this will cause fire to chase them. This fire is going to originate from Tectus, and every Tectus that is currently alive will cast this ability. That includes Tectus, the Shards of Tectus, and the Motes of Tectus. The fire does quite significant damage, and you'll want to make sure that nobody is running through it or standing in it, or it'll most likely kill them. The second major ability the ranged group will need to worry about is called Earthen Pillar. Tectus will spawn a pillar in a brown circle on the ground. A few seconds after the circle appears, the pillar will pop out of it. When this happens, anybody standing inside the swirly will be instantly killed. You want to make sure your group moves out of it quickly and then restacks on either side of the pillar. So this way you can group as many pillars together as close as possible. The pillars do persist for quite a while. They will eventually despawn, but later in the fight when there's more Tectuses up, there will be more and more pillars, because each Tectus will spawn one. If you are not smart about where you place them, this could easily cause your raid to be cut off, and you'll want to be aware of this, especially for your healers, so that they can continue to heal the tank. Once there's lots of shards and motes up, they'll be taking quite a bit of damage. The last ability Tectus casts is called Fracture. This will affect both the ranged and the melee groups. What this is Tectus will spawn a brown swirly on the ground, like the Earthen Pillar, except much smaller. A few seconds after it spawns, a small rock will pop up, and do significant damage to anyone standing in it, but won't kill them if they're topped off. It'll also knock them up into the air for a few seconds. This can cause problems if they're either standing inside of an earthen pillar, because they won't be able to get out of the pillar in time and they'll die from that, or if they have the Crystalline Barrage debuff on them, it'll cause them to be delayed running away from the group, which means the fire might get too close to the group and might kill people. So you'll have to be aware if this happens. Tectus and the Shards of Tectus have a buff called the Living Mountain, and this buff prevents them from being killed unless they're channeling the Tectonic Upheaval. They start channeling this once they reach 100 energy, and it does massive raid-wide damage for 12 seconds, so you'll need to make sure you have healing cooldowns used for this, and you want to make sure your groups are stacked as tightly as they can for AoE healing. You'll need to make sure your DPS focus down Tectus when he's doing this, and ignore the adds that may be up still. When you have Shards and Motes, you want to target fire whichever ones are casting Tectonic Upheaval, so that they don't finish the cast. If they finish the cast without dying, they'll regain about 20% health, and you'll have to DPS them down again. The lower health the Tectus or Shards or Motes are, the faster they'll regen energy, so if they do finish a cast and gain some health back, it won't be too long before they cast it again. Just make sure your raid is aware of this, and you can actively target fire whichever ones need to be killed. As a side note, as of making this video, the Motes of Tectus also have the Living Mountain debuff, though it doesn't seem to affect them, and they can be killed outside of casting Tectonic Upheaval. There are two different types of adds that will also periodically spawn throughout this encounter. The first we'll talk about is the Earth Warper. This little guy will cast two different spells throughout the fight. The first is called Gift of Earth, which causes him to spawn a vortex orb-looking thing that'll float towards Tectus. If it reaches Tectus, he will gain 10 stacks of accretion, which we'll talk about later. A player can intercept this orb and take heavy physical damage, and also get a debuff of petrification, but then the boss will no longer intercept it and get these stacks of accretion. Now the petrification debuff that goes on the player that intercepts it will cause him basically to be unable to tank Tectus. Whenever Tectus melee attacks the player with this debuff, it'll cause him to gain stacks of accretion anyway, and it'll also cause him to gain a small amount of health back, which you do not want to happen. You can have a melee try to intercept this, but it might kill them in all likelihood, and the best way to handle this mechanic is just to stun the Gift of Earth cast. The ad won't be alive for very long, because it should be focused cleave down, so it should only get between 1 to 2 casts off, and you can easily set up a stun rotation through it. Our off-tank that tanked it was able to stun just about all of them himself, so maybe just have 1 or 2 backup melee in order to handle this. The other ability that the Earth Warper will cast is called Earthen Flechettes, which is just a cone attack that you'll want to make sure none of the melee are getting hit by, because it'll probably one-shot them. You also want to make sure the tanks are positioned so that both tanks aren't getting hit by this, and it's just the off-tank. The second ad is called the Berserker, and while this ad has no notable abilities, he does hit for quite a bit, and you'll want to make sure he gets killed. Between Tectus phases, when the one Tectus dies and the other ones are spawning, is a good time to make sure all your ranged and melee DPS are focusing down these adds that are still alive, and they're killed before the next Tectus wave spawns. Accretion, quite simply, is a buff the boss will periodically gain throughout the fight, including the shards and the motes. It's a damage buff that he gains over time that does stack. However, damaging the boss or whatever shard or mote is up will cause the stacks to be removed. And they're pretty much removed instantly throughout the fight, so you can ignore this mechanic for the most part unless he does get a Gift of Earth. If this happens, the tank will take quite a bit of extra damage for quite a while. Each stack is, I believe, 5%, so that'll be a hefty bit of extra damage on the tank. So you want to make sure that he doesn't get any accretion stacks from the Gift of Earth. You want to position the boss in the center of the room, and have your ranged and healers starting where the entrance is, stacking on one player. You want to have your tank and melee DPS situated in such a way that they, along with the boss, form a T with the ranged group. This way, when the fire comes out of the boss, it'll come out of his side, and will chase the ranged DPS. And then it won't affect the tanks or the melee DPS, and they don't need to worry about dodging fire. For this kill, we ran the crystalline barrages to the right, and we moved to the left whenever we got an earthen pillar. You want to make sure you predetermine this before you pull, so that everyone's on the same page. Alright, this is a pretty simple boss. You want to start off with your raid positioned according to the map that I showed you, and determine whether or not you want to run your fires to the left or the right, and then the pillars in the opposite direction, of course. Whenever the adds spawn, you want to make sure that you're bringing them into melee, and that the melee are cleaving them down, and that the ranged are attacking them if you need the DPS on them. You want to focus down Tectus as quickly as possible, and make sure he is killed within the Tectonic Upheaval. You can get him down to 1 health outside of Tectonic Upheaval, and just keep him there and kill the adds until he casts the Upheaval. If he does finish casting, don't forget he's going to heal, and you'll need to DPS him down some more. Once he's killed and he goes into his animation to spawn his shards, make sure you kill off any adds that are still alive. If there are no adds, you can also use this downtime to pop mana potions if you need it, or to cast any AoE spells that would otherwise be unused to just get extra damage. Once the 2 shards are up, you want to make sure you're cleaving them down, but you're focusing one, so that it definitely dies before the other. And make sure you have healing cooldowns available for when they Tectonic Upheaval, because it's going to be 2 of them, so it'll be even more damage this time. Also, you'll have 2 pillars going out at about the same time, along with 2 fires. When both players are running the fires, they'll need to make sure that they're aware of the other, so that the players don't move in such a way that it kills the other player with the fire and gets them off. You'll need to also watch out for fractures, as there'll be even more of those also. Adds will still be spawning in this phase, and you'll need to make sure you're killing them and still stunning the Gift of Earth. Once one of the shards is killed, he'll spawn 4 motes. Now you'll have 4 motes along with the shard and possibly adds. This is the point where you're going to want to lust, and you're going to focus down the motes. You can use your AoEs here, that's what we used, and they died pretty quickly. They have less health than the shards, which have less health than Tectus himself. And once all the motes are killed, and again, you don't need to wait for the Tectonic Upheaval, because that is, they don't need it. They have the buff, but they don't need to be killed within the Upheaval. Once you kill all the motes off, then you can kill off the other shard, and then kill the 4 motes from that one. And then there you go, you've killed it, and now you can collect your loot. When there are 4 motes up, don't forget there'll be just that many more fires going out and that many more pillars going out, and it can get pretty hectic. When you get to that last phase, we generally abandon our stack strat and we kind of just spread out as a group. We found that when we were stacked with the 4 motes and shard up, there was just too much stuff going on that our healers and DPS couldn't do damage because they were constantly running, dodging fires and fractures and pillars. So we spread out as a raid so that a few people would have to move from a pillar, but not the whole raid. When you do this, however, you just need to be careful that you're not cutting off any of your group from the actual boss, especially healers, so they can still heal the boss. So we kind of just spread in a circle around the room. This way everyone still had line of sight and wouldn't be cutting off anyone. Generally, when we got fire in this phase, we would run it straight back to the wall, and then run it along the wall, and then you're not going to run it through anybody or cut them off in a way that they can't pop a defensive and just run through it if they need to. But yeah, it's quite a simple fight, and once your raid gets the handle on all the mechanics, it should go down pretty quickly. Best of luck to you, and congratulations on your future kill.